Little girl saw a German shepherd standing on a roof edge. What happened next left everyone crying. A little girl. A silent scream. A moment that shattered the silence of an entire town. What she did next left doctors stunned and strangers in tears. This is more than a rescue. It's a lesson in bravery, love, and what it truly means to be human. Like, share, and tell us where you're watching from, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. The morning began like any other in the little town, a place where life moved slowly, where the sound of church bells marked the hours, and where neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles across white picket fences. The streets were lined with maple trees, their leaves catching the gentle rays of the sun as a soft breeze rustled through. Children's laughter carried faintly from a nearby yard, and somewhere the smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the corner bakery. It was the kind of morning that promised nothing unusual, nothing extraordinary, just the comfort of routine. But sometimes, it is in the calmest of mornings that the most unexpected moments unfold. As the town stretched awake, a small voice pierced the quiet hum of the day. Standing in her front yard, a little girl no more than 6 years old froze mid-step. Her wide blue eyes locked onto something above, her finger rising slowly, trembling not from fear but from disbelief. "Mom, look!" she cried, her voice cracking the peaceful stillness. Her mother, busy watering the roses, followed the child's gaze upward. And then she gasped. There, silhouetted against the pale morning sky, stood a German shepherd, majestic yet hauntingly fragile, balanced on the very edge of a 2-story rooftop. His paws clung to the tiles as if each step was a desperate decision between holding on and letting go. The sunlight glinted against his coat, but what caught everyone's breath was not his stance, but his eyes. Deep, weary, searching eyes that looked as though they carried the weight of countless untold sorrows. Within minutes, the quiet street transformed. Neighbors gathered one by one, shading their eyes as they looked upward. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Whose dog is that? How did he get up there? Is he about to jump?" But no one had an answer. The German shepherd did not bark, did not growl, did not even move much. He simply stood there, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, his tail low, ears twitching to the sound of the growing crowd below. The little girl's heart pounded in her chest as she tugged at her mother's sleeve. "He looks sad," she whispered, "like he's waiting for someone." Every eye was fixed on the rooftop. Time seemed to slow, the breeze pausing midair, the birds going silent as if nature itself was holding its breath. One slip, one wrong move, and the dog would fall. The girl stepped forward, her tiny shoes crunching against the gravel. She couldn't look away. There was something in the shepherd's stance that called to her, something fragile, almost human in its loneliness. Others saw danger, she saw pain. Others muttered about the risk, she whispered about the sadness in his eyes. The tension deepened as the shepherd inched closer to the edge, his nails scraping against the tiles with a sound that made everyone flinch. A woman gasped and covered her mouth. A man shouted, "Hey, get back," as though his voice could command the animal to safety. But the dog barely reacted. His gaze remained fixed on something unseen, far away, as if he was lost in a world of memories only he could feel. The little girl's voice, soft but unwavering, rose above the murmurs. "Don't be scared," she called out gently, as if speaking to a friend. "I'm here." People turned, surprised, but the dog's ears twitched. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if he had heard her, really heard her. His body shifted ever so slightly, head lowering, eyes glistening in the morning light. And in that moment, a hush fell over the crowd. What was he doing up there? Why had he climbed to such a dangerous place? Was he searching, waiting, grieving? The questions swirled like restless winds, but none carried answers. Only fear, only suspense. The girl clutched her small hands to her chest, eyes never leaving the shepherd. In her innocence, she didn't see a dangerous animal or a perilous scene. She saw a soul calling out in silence, a story perched on the edge of despair. The German shepherd swayed slightly, the tiles shifting beneath his paws. Gasps echoed below, someone cried out, but the girl stood still. And in that suspended moment, between the rooftops and the earth, between fear and hope, the town realized they weren't just witnessing a dog in danger. They were witnessing the beginning of something far greater. In the heart of the little town, mornings always carried a certain comfort. Life moved at a pace that allowed people to notice the simple things. The way the sunlight spilled across rooftops, the smell of dew clinging to the grass, the rhythm of footsteps as neighbors strolled to the bakery for fresh loaves of bread. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, where greetings were exchanged with genuine smiles, and where each child was treated as if they belonged to the entire community. Among those children was Emily, a lively 6-year-old whose world was painted in shades of innocence and wonder. Her days were filled with tiny adventures, chasing butterflies in her mother's garden, collecting smooth pebbles from the stream at the edge of town, and laughing with the kind of abandon only children know. Emily had a way of turning the ordinary into magic. To her, every bird that sang was telling her a secret, every flower that bloomed was smiling back at her. That morning was no different. Emily skipped down the gravel path in front of her home, her little shoes crunching with each step, her pigtails bouncing with the rhythm of her laughter. The sun had just climbed high enough to warm the earth, casting a golden glow that made the white fences shimmer and the flower beds glow like jewels. Her mother was trimming the rose bushes, humming softly, while her father read the morning paper on the porch, occasionally glancing up with a contented sigh. Everything felt safe, predictable, almost too ordinary. And yet, life has a way of inserting the extraordinary when it is least expected. Emily was in the middle of hopping between the stepping stones in her yard when she felt something, a pull, a curious whisper in the air. She paused, squinting as a flicker of movement caught her eye above the rooftops across the street. Tilting her head, she shaded her face with her hand and blinked against the sun. And then her heart skipped. High above, balancing precariously at the edge of a roof, stood a German shepherd. At first, Emily thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. Dogs belonged on lawns, on porches, at their owners' feet, not perched on shingles like restless birds. She blinked again, but the sight remained. Strong legs trembling slightly, tail low, ears shifting to the sounds below. The shepherd was real, and he was standing dangerously close to falling. Her little chest tightened, but instead of fear, what struck her first was a strange sadness. Even from a distance, she could sense it. The dog didn't look wild or threatening. He looked lost. "Mommy!" Emily cried out, pointing with all her might. "Up there." Her mother barely glanced, brushing the dirt from her gloves. "Emily, sweetheart, don't point. It's not polite." "No, Mommy." Emily insisted, tugging at her sleeve now, her voice trembling with urgency. "On the roof. The dog, he's going to fall." This time her mother followed her daughter's gaze, frowning as she searched the rooftops. The bright morning light made it difficult, but then she saw it. Her breath caught, and for a moment she could only stare. The figure of the shepherd stood so still it almost blended with the chimney's shadow, yet the glimmer of fur and the tilt of a head made the truth undeniable. Her gasp carried into the street, and soon a neighbor across the way looked up too. Within minutes, murmurs traveled like ripples on water. Curtains pulled aside, doors opened, and more eyes turned skyward. But while the adults muttered and speculated, Emily remained transfixed. She tugged again at her mother's hand. "He looks sad," she whispered, "like he's waiting for someone." Her words went largely unheard. Grown-ups debated in low, worried tones how the dog got up there, who he might belong to, what should be done. One man waved dismissively. "It's just a stray. He'll get down when he's ready." Another shook his head. "That roof is steep. He'll break his neck." Emily stamped her little foot. "No, he needs help. Why don't you see?" Her small voice quivered, but her eyes never wavered from the shepherd. The dog, as though sensing her gaze, lifted his head ever so slightly. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, child and animal, two souls bound by an invisible thread. Emily felt it deep in her chest, an unspoken plea, a silent cry she could not ignore. Around her, life continued to swirl, neighbors whispering, adults shaking their heads, some even walking away. To them, it was either a mystery or a problem too strange to bother with. But to Emily, it was neither. It was clear, simple, undeniable. The dog was hurting and he was calling out, even if no one else could hear him. She clutched her hands together, her voice soft but steady. "Don't worry," she murmured to herself, as if making a promise. "I'll help you. I won't let you fall." In that moment, the ordinary day shifted. The sunshine, the laughter, the peaceful routines, all of it became the backdrop for something far more extraordinary. The little girl who saw what no one else dared to feel had just stepped into a story that would change not only her life but the life of the lonely shepherd on the roof. The German shepherd stood frozen at the very edge of the rooftop, his strong frame trembling in a way that betrayed his vulnerability. From the street below, his posture looked tense, fragile, almost broken. His paws pressed tightly against the uneven tiles, claws making faint scratching sounds that set everyone on edge. He didn't bark. He didn't move with the wildness of a stray. Instead, he seemed to be carrying something much heavier than his own weight, a sorrow that lived deep in his weary eyes. They weren't the eyes of a dangerous animal. They were the eyes of someone searching for something that could not be found. By now, the entire neighborhood had gathered. Mothers held their children's hands, neighbors leaned against fences, and the local baker stepped out from his shop, his apron still dusted with flour. The postman stopped his bicycle mid-route, staring up in disbelief. Whispers spread quickly, passing from person to person like a restless wind. "Whose dog is that?" one asked. "How did he even get up there?" said another. "Is he trapped? Do you think he's going to jump?" No one had answers, only questions, and with each passing second, the tension in the air grew thicker. Emily, the little girl who had been the first to spot him, remained at the front of the crowd. Her small fists clenched at her sides, her eyes wide and unblinking. She felt the fear around her, she heard the panic in the voices of grown-ups, but deep inside her heart she sensed something different. To her, the dog was not dangerous, not strange. He was sad. He was calling for someone, though no one else seemed to hear it. "He needs help," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. The German shepherd shifted slightly, his hind legs trembling as they slid a little too close to the edge. The sharp scrape of his nails against the roof made the entire crowd gasp. A woman cried out and covered her mouth. Children clung tighter to their mothers. Emily took a half step forward, her voice rising with unusual steadiness for someone so small. "He's not angry," she said, loud enough for some to hear. "He's sad. Can't you see it?" A hush fell for just a moment as eyes turned from the child back to the rooftop. And though many dismissed her words as childish imagination, others noticed it too, the hollow, grief-filled look in the shepherd's eyes. Desperate to act, one of the neighbors ran to fetch a ladder. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and confident, determined to solve the problem quickly. "I'll get him down," he announced as he placed the ladder against the side of the house. Emily tugged urgently at her mother's dress, shaking her head. "He won't let them," she whispered. "He doesn't trust them." But no one listened. The man began to climb, step after heavy step, his hands stretched out as he tried to coax the dog closer. The shepherd froze, ears pricked sharply, muscles tight. As the man reached the roofline, murmuring words meant to soothe, the dog took a step back. His tail tucked low, his body angled away, his paws slipped against the shingles. For one terrifying moment, his back legs dangled in midair, and a cry rose from below as people reached out helplessly as though their hands could stop him from falling. Somehow, he regained his footing, claws scrambling for purchase. A growl rumbled deep in his chest, low and fearful, not threatening but desperate. "Stay away." The man retreated quickly, his face pale, sweat shining on his forehead. "It's no use," he muttered, shaking his head. "He'll fall if we push him." The crowd erupted again with suggestions. "Call animal control," shouted one. "Get a rope," yelled another. A woman said through trembling lips, "We need the fire department." The chorus of voices swelled, but none of it reached the shepherd's broken spirit. He remained there, chest heaving, eyes glazed with grief, as though each breath was heavier than the last. Emily pressed her small palms together, whispering to herself. She knew this wasn't just a lost dog on a rooftop. This was something deeper, something only her heart could understand. She could feel the silent cry in his eyes, and somehow, she knew he was clinging to more than the edge of that roof. He was clinging to the last thread of hope. "Don't worry," she murmured, her voice trembling yet sure. "I see you. I won't let you go." As though carried by her words, the shepherd's ears twitched. For a fleeting second, his eyes softened. His tail flickered once, uncertain but alive, as if he had heard her promise. But the sound of distant sirens soon grew louder, winding through the streets, signaling that help was on the way. Relief washed over some of the adults, but Emily's heart sank. She knew what would happen when the men with loud voices and heavy hands arrived. They would try to force him down. And forcing wasn't what he needed. The shepherd inched backward, paws slipping once more, teetering dangerously on the edge. Gasps and shouts filled the air, the panic almost unbearable. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as her lips trembled with words she could no longer hold back. "Please," she whispered, so soft only the breeze could carry it, "let me help him before it's too late." The sirens were still approaching when a soft voice rose from the crowd. It was Mrs. Henderson, one of the oldest residents on the street. Her wrinkled hand clutched the railing of her porch as she stepped forward, her voice trembling not with fear, but with recognition. "I know that dog," she whispered. The murmurs quieted, eyes turning toward her. Mrs. Henderson's faded blue eyes glistened as she stared up at the shepherd. "That house, it used to belong to Mr. Whitaker. Do you remember him? The old man who lived there all those years?" A few heads nodded. The name stirred faint memories in those who had lived in the town long enough. Mr. Whitaker had been a quiet soul, a widower who spent his days tending to his vegetable garden, mending broken fences, and greeting neighbors with a polite nod. He hadn't been a man of many words, but there had always been one constant by his side: his German shepherd. "They were inseparable," Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice gaining strength as the memories unfolded. "That dog never left his side. If you saw Mr. Whitaker, you saw the shepherd. Every morning, without fail, the two of them would walk to the park at the edge of town. The dog would sit by the bench while Mr. Whitaker fed the ducks. And every afternoon, you'd find the shepherd stretched out on that very roof, keeping watch while the old man worked in the garden below." Gasps rippled through the crowd as more people began to recall. "That's right," murmured the baker, his brow furrowing as the picture came back to him. "I used to deliver loaves to him. I remember the dog staring down at me from the roof, like a guardian angel." Another neighbor added softly, He was always there, always watching. He wouldn't even bark, just watch, as if making sure his master was safe. Emily's eyes widened as she listened, her little heart pounding with the realization that this was no ordinary stray. This was a dog with a story, a past that explained the sorrow in his eyes. "But Mr. Whitaker passed away," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice breaking slightly. "It's been nearly 5 years now. After his funeral, the shepherd vanished. Some said he ran off, too heartbroken to stay. Others thought someone had taken him in. But I knew we hadn't seen the last of him." Her words hung heavy in the air. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, glancing back up at the roof where the dog stood. Suddenly, his presence wasn't just strange, it was tragic. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He was grieving, returning to the only place he had ever known as home, the place where he had kept watch for the man he loved. Emily's throat tightened as she looked at him anew. She could almost picture it. Years ago, the shepherd lying proudly along the edge of that same roof, his ears perked, his eyes scanning the street, while an old man hummed in the garden below. The image was so vivid, so alive, that tears welled in her eyes. The neighbors, too, began to recall more fragments. One man remembered seeing the shepherd waiting faithfully at the gate each evening, tail wagging as Mr. Whitaker returned from town. A woman recalled how, after the old man fell ill, the dog had lain by his bedside day and night, refusing food until the very end. The loyalty of the shepherd had been the talk of the town once, though over the years, memory had blurred until now, until he returned, like a ghost from the past, to remind them all. Emily tugged gently on her mother's hand. "He's not lost, Mommy," she whispered. "He's looking for his friend. He doesn't know he's gone." Her mother's eyes softened as the truth sank in. Around them, others nodded sadly, wiping at their eyes. The story was no longer just about a dog on a roof. It was about love that had endured beyond death, about loyalty so unyielding it had tethered the shepherd to the memory of his master. The dog shifted again, lowering his head as though weighed down by years of sorrow. His ears flicked at the voices below, but his eyes searched the horizon, as if still waiting for the figure of an old man to appear, walking slowly with his cane, calling him down with a gentle pat on the knee. But that call would never come. And so he waited and waited, until grief brought him back to the place where he had last known peace. The crowd grew silent, no longer buzzing with questions or solutions. Instead, they simply watched, humbled by the story unfolding before them. Some wept openly, others pressed their lips tight, but all felt the same ache in their hearts. Emily took a small step forward, her voice quiet yet unwavering. "I can help him," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "He just needs someone to tell him it's okay, that he's not alone." Her words carried on the still morning air, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed the shepherd's gaze dropped, his sorrowful eyes locking with hers once again. It was as if he, too, remembered the childlike honesty of love, the one thing that could cut through grief, no matter how deep. In that instant, Emily understood something that the adults around her had forgotten. The dog wasn't clinging to the roof because he was trapped. He was clinging to memory, to loyalty, to a love that time had taken but his heart refused to release. And as she stood there, tiny against the backdrop of a grieving town and a sorrowful shepherd, Emily realized that perhaps the only way to save him was not to pull him down, but to remind him that love, even in loss, could still find its way back into the present. The wail of sirens grew louder until the red truck turned the corner, its flashing lights scattering reflections across the quiet street. The crowd parted as firefighters jumped down, their heavy boots striking the pavement with purpose. Helmets glinted in the morning light as one of them pulled out a coiled rope, another steadied a long ladder. For many in the crowd, relief rushed in like a tide. Finally, Professionals had come, men who were trained to handle dangerous rescues. But to Emily, a knot of dread tightened in her chest. She knew loud voices and heavy hands would only frighten the shepherd more. The lead firefighter, a tall man with a trimmed beard, raised his hand to calm the crowd. "Everyone step back," he instructed. "We'll get him down safely." His tone was confident, but as he looked up at the trembling shepherd, even he hesitated. The dog's body was rigid, his chest rising and falling in frantic rhythm. His ears pinned back as the men unrolled their gear, the clang of metal ladders and the snap of rope echoing in the still air like thunderclaps. One firefighter began to climb, his boots heavy against the rungs. The shepherd's eyes widened, a low growl rumbling from his throat. He backed up a few steps, paws skidding against the edge. The crowd gasped, several people crying out as his back legs dangled dangerously close to open air. The firefighter froze, gripping the ladder tightly. "He's panicking," he called down, his voice strained. "If I go any closer, he'll fall." They tried again, this time with two men, one from either side of the roof, creeping carefully toward him. The shepherd's chest heaved harder, his eyes darting wildly, his tail curling tight against his body. Suddenly, he let out a sharp, anguished bark that echoed through the street, a sound so raw, so broken, it sent shivers through every listener. Then, with a desperate lunge, he staggered closer to the edge, the tiles beneath him cracking slightly under the weight of his movement. The crowd screamed. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. The firefighters froze in place, hands raised as if to hold back tragedy with sheer will. Emily's small voice broke through the chaos. "Stop!" she cried, her tone trembling but strong enough to cut through the noise. Heads turned, surprised that such a small girl would dare interrupt the scene. But she didn't falter. "Please," she pleaded, her wide eyes locked on the men. "You'll scare him. He doesn't understand you. Let me try." Gasps rose from the crowd. Her mother grabbed her shoulder. "Emily, no," she whispered urgently. But Emily shook her head, her gaze never leaving the shepherd. "He listens to me," she said simply, her voice carrying a conviction that silenced the murmurs around her. Even the firefighters paused, glancing at one another. What harm could there be in letting her try, when every attempt so far had failed? Slowly, cautiously, the lead firefighter gestured for everyone to step back. "Give her space," he said. The street grew silent, every eye fixed on the tiny figure of a little girl stepping away from her mother's side. Emily's small shoes tapped softly against the pavement as she walked toward the base of the house. Her hands trembled, but her face was calm, her eyes full of something far stronger than fear, compassion. She tilted her head back, meeting the shepherd's sorrowful gaze. "Hi," she called softly, her voice like a whisper of wind. "It's me. Don't be scared." The shepherd's ears twitched, his body still tense, but he did not back away further. For the first time that morning, he hesitated. Emily placed her foot on the bottom rung of the ladder. The firefighters held their breath, but she moved slowly, carefully, her tiny fingers clutching the sides. Step by step, she climbed, speaking all the while. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she whispered. "I know you miss him. I know you're sad. But I'm here now." The shepherd let out a soft whine, a sound so pitiful it made tears sting the eyes of everyone watching below. His claws scraped the shingles, but instead of retreating, he leaned ever so slightly toward her voice. Emily reached the top, her small figure fragile against the wide stretch of roof. She did not rush. She crouched low, keeping her eyes gentle, her hands stretched out not to grab but to offer. "It's okay," she murmured, her tone steady. "I won't hurt you. You can trust me." The crowd was silent, the only sound the faint sobs of those two moved to contain their tears. The shepherd trembled, his chest heaving as if the weight of years pressed down on him all at once. Then, with slow, faltering steps, he inched forward. His paws slipped once, causing gasps to ripple through the crowd, but Emily didn't flinch. She whispered again, "I've got you. I won't let you fall." At last, the shepherd reached her. His nose brushed against her tiny hand, a tentative touch that carried the fragile trust of a broken heart. Emily stroked his muzzle gently, her fingers trembling as she whispered, "Good boy, you're safe now." And then it happened. The shepherd collapsed, his powerful body folding into her lap as though exhaustion had finally conquered him. He pressed his head against her chest, releasing a long, shuddering breath that sounded like a sigh of surrender. Emily's small arms wrapped around his neck instinctively, holding him as if cradling a wounded soul. The crowd erupted, not with noise, but with tears. Grown men wiped their eyes, women clutched at their hearts, and even the firefighters, hardened by years of emergencies, turned away to compose themselves. It was not the sight of a child and a dog that broke them. It was the undeniable power of innocence, the reminder that sometimes trust cannot be forced. It can only be given freely to the purest of hearts. As Emily sat there, cradling the weary shepherd in her arms, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sirens faded into the distance, the murmurs stilled, and for one sacred moment, there was nothing but the bond between a grieving dog and a brave little girl who had given him the one thing he needed most, the promise that he was not alone anymore. They brought him down wrapped in a firefighter's jacket like a rescued child, his breath coming in thin, shaky bursts against Emily's shoulder. The world around them, applause, sirens, tearful neighbors, blurred into a soft hum as the little girl cradled the shepherd's head and whispered, "You're safe. I promise." He didn't struggle. He didn't bark. He simply closed his eyes for the first time that morning, and the hard iron of his ribs lifted and fell under Emily's palm as though testing the shape of safety. At the clinic, bright lights and the antiseptic sting of alcohol made him tremble again. The vet, kind-eyed, careful, spoke in a low tone as she slipped a line into his leg. "Dehydrated. Exhausted. He's been running on fear for a long time." They scanned for a chip. The reader chirped once and fell silent. No owner in the system. No easy answers. "He needs a quiet home and a soft place to sleep," the vet said, glancing at Emily, who sat ramrod straight on the stool, tiny sneakers not touching the floor. "Just for a few days," her mother started, but the little girl had already nodded. In her mind, the decision had been made the moment he pressed his face into her chest on that roof. They called him Rook that afternoon, half joke, half poetry, because he'd stood sentinel on a rooftop like a stone piece guarding a fragile kingdom. The name stuck the instant Emily whispered it. His ears flicked, and he breathed out like someone who finally recognized the sound of home. Back at the house, they carried him over the threshold as if crossing some old river, and spread quilts by the window where the afternoon warmed the floorboards into honey. Rook circled once, twice, 3 times, a tired planet trying to find itself, and lay down with a groan so human it broke everyone's heart all over again. Night was the real test. Shadows stretched long and thin across the ceiling. A delivery truck backfired somewhere on the main road. Rain-tired gutters ticked. Each small sound folded Rook into himself. He startled at the rattle of a pan. He flinched at a neighbor's laugh floating through the open window. When he dreamed, his legs twitched and his jaws moved around invisible warnings. Emily slid off her bed and curled on the floor beside him, cheek on his shoulder, little hand traveling in slow, steady strokes between his ears. "In for 3, out for 3, she whispered, counting like her teacher had shown them when the classroom got too loud. Rook's breath matched hers 1, 2, 3. The storm around him loosened its grip. Morning came as a kindness. Pancakes and orange slices scented the kitchen. Rook lifted his head, eyes hazel and hopeful. Emily's mother set a bowl of water down, then a small portion of soft food. He ate slowly, like someone learning a new language. After, he watched Emily pack her school bag, crayons, a library book, a carefully folded permission slip, and when she stood to leave, he stood too. "He can't come today," her mother said gently. Rook froze, confused. Emily knelt and tapped the rug twice. "Wait," she told him and pointed to the window. "I'll come back." He kept the window vigil all morning, head on sill, tail thumping whenever footsteps passed, a quiet lighthouse waiting for one ship. Routines stitched themselves around him. Short walks at dusk. A bath with warm water and shampoo that smelled like oat fields. Afterward, he shake-showered everyone into squealing laughter. The vet changed his bandage and smiled at the weight creeping back over his ribs. The first time a ladder clanked on a neighboring house, he shivered. Emily stepped between him and the noise, palm on his chest. "I see it too," she said. "We're okay." They built him a den under the stairs with a thick blanket, an old sweater of Emily's, and a string of battery fairy lights that made the dark look gentle. When thunder rolled like old grief across the town, he went there on his own and returned when the sky was finished speaking. If Emily was a magnet, Rook was the iron shavings that could not help but follow. He learned the choreography of her life with reverent accuracy. The exact minute the school bus released her, the way she kicked off her shoes, left, then right, the route her feet took down the hall. He slept at the bathroom threshold while she brushed her teeth, tail sweeping the tile like a metronome. In the yard, he trotted the inside of the sidewalk so she would have the safer path. When a soccer ball came too fast, he blocked it with a shoulder and glanced at her as if to ask, "Was that good?" It was all he wanted, to be in the way of any harm before it could find her name. The story of the roof spread the way good stories do, through bakery counters and barbershop mirrors, across church pews and checkout lines. Strangers stopped by with blankets and biscuits, notes taped to their collars by scout troops in careful handwriting. For Rook, the brave. The firehouse invited Emily for a tour. The captain slipped a child-sized red helmet over her hair and shook Rook's paw for the camera. The photo went on the station's wall next to black and white pictures of men with soot-streaked faces. The caption read, "Courage comes in all sizes." Neighbors remembered the old man who had once owned Emily's house, the one who'd fixed shingles and planted tomatoes and sat on the roof at sunset with a big shepherd at his side. One woman returned a key and a cap. "He used to lend me his ladder," she said, voice soft with years. Emily took Rook to the old porch that Sunday. He paused at the steps and lifted his head, eyes glassing with a sheen that looked like memory. Emily set the cap on the rail and hung a small wind chime by the eave, silver tubes that sang only when the gentlest breeze passed. "Thank you for loving him," she whispered to the house. Rook leaned into her knee and, for the first time since the roof, wagged a whole wag, not just a cautious flick. Healing is rarely a straight road, and theirs wasn't. A slammed locker at school sent Rook low to the ground. A kite's snapping tail made him tuck and turn. But each time, Emily named the sound and breathed with him, and the surprise dissolved quicker than before. He learned new words: home, easy, friend, and one old word returned to him like an old coin found in a pocket: play. He chased a foam ball in looping, goofy arcs, ears flapping, tongue out, then skidded to a stop to check her face, just to be sure joy was allowed. To us, it was required. He became, no, he appointed himself, her protector, not with teeth or noise, but with presence. When a boy on a bike swerved too close, Rook pivoted, hip to Emily's leg, guiding her without drama toward the grass. When a doorbell rang after dark, he placed himself in the slim space between the living room and the hall, body relaxed but eyes steady. On a cold Wednesday, he woke Emily's mother with a persistent nudge and a soft whine. A pot left simmering had boiled dry, a thin smoke just beginning to curl. They aired the house out and fed him too many treats and cried a little at the thought of what may have been. The town wanted to repay a debt it could not name. The hardware store donated lumber, the high school art club brought paints. One Saturday the neighborhood gathered at the very house where everything had started. They rebuilt the rickety lattice, added a safe railing, scrubbed the shingles clean. On the side wall, the students painted a mural. A rooftop, a dog at the edge, a small hand reaching, not to seize, but to offer. Above it, in sweeping blue letters, "You're not alone." Rook sat at Emily's feet while the paint dried, head tilted as though listening to something only he could hear, a note of peace under all the bustle. By late spring, the weight of fear had slid off him like an ill-fitting coat. He slept on his back sometimes, belly to the sky, paws loose and ridiculous. His trot had bounce, his eyes had mischief, his bark came rarely and always with reason. Emily's mother joked that she had gained a second shadow. Two, actually, she corrected herself whenever she saw their silhouettes layered on the sidewalk. One small, one tall, both moving in step. One evening, when the sun spread gold on the kitchen tiles, Emily sat with a notebook and wrote slowly, tongue between her teeth the way she did when she cared about every letter. She tore the page free and taped it to the fridge at her eye level, where important things go. Later, when the dishes were done and Rook had carried every sock from the laundry basket to his bed as an offering, her mother read the note and swallowed hard. In slanted pencil, it said, "We didn't just save a dog on a roof. He saved us from being afraid of edges." That night, as the wind chime on the old porch sang its small silver song and the mural dried to a memory, Rook curled at the foot of Emily's bed, the same 3 turns as always. The house breathed around them, floorboards settling, pipes sighing, a car whispering by on the far street. Emily reached down, found his ear, and gave it one last, gentle fold. He sighed the soft, grateful sigh of the newly safe and let go. The seasons shifted softly, as they always do in small towns where life is measured not by the ticking of clocks but by the rise of flowers, the drift of leaves, the hush of snow. What had once been a street shaken by the image of a dog trembling on a rooftop slowly became the street known for something else, something deeper. People still paused sometimes, standing on the sidewalk where they had gathered that morning, looking up at the roof with a kind of reverence. It wasn't fear or shock anymore. It was memory, carried like a lantern that would never go out. Rook's vigil had etched itself into the fabric of the town. The dog on the roof wasn't just a story they told. It was a reminder that loyalty doesn't end at the grave, that devotion doesn't vanish when the world moves on. Love leaves footprints, invisible to most, but carved deep into the souls of those who remember. For Emily, the lesson unfolded slowly, like pages in a bedtime story read night after night. Each day with Rook was another thread stitching grief into hope. She saw how he would sometimes stare at the horizon, ears pricked as though listening for a voice that would never call again. She understood in her child's heart what many adults had forgotten. He wasn't just looking for his master. He was teaching everyone who saw him that loyalty outlives absence, and that love has a way of haunting places it once called home. The neighbors often spoke of it, especially the elders who had lived long enough to know both joy and loss. "That dog," Mr. Patel, the grocer, would say, "he's proof that devotion doesn't vanish when someone leaves this world. It lingers. It holds on even when we've let go." His words would travel through the bakery, the post office, the little cafe on Main Street, where people gathered to sip coffee and trade memories. Slowly, the rooftop vigil became not a tale of fear but one of faith, the faith that love never truly ends. At night, when the house was quiet and the wind carried whispers through the trees, Emily performed a ritual no one had taught her. She would take the same blanket that once belonged to her baby brother, soft with years of washing, and she would tuck it gently around Rook as he curled on the rug. He would lift his head slightly, eyes hazel and heavy with trust, then sigh into the folds of fabric and settle. It was a small act, almost ordinary, yet drenched with symbolism. Once, he had guarded from above, watching over a master he could never save. Now, a child guarded him, whispering with each tuck of the blanket, "You are safe. You are loved." The role reversal wasn't lost on those who saw it. Emily's mother sometimes paused in the doorway, her throat tightening at the sight. It struck her that in giving comfort, her daughter was carrying wisdom far beyond her years. She saw in her child's actions the truth that healing often comes not from grand gestures but from simple acts of devotion repeated faithfully, night after night. Rook himself seemed to feel the shift. The haunted look in his eyes softened over time, the sharp lines of grief dulled by Emily's presence. He no longer lingered at windows as though waiting for someone else. Instead, he followed Emily's laughter through the rooms, tail sweeping the floor like a broom clearing away dust. He still remembered, how could he not? But memory no longer chained him to sorrow. It was as though the loyalty he once gave to a lost master had been passed forward, reborn in a bond with a child who needed him just as much as he needed her. The town took notice. Where once they had gathered in fear, now they gathered in admiration. At the fall festival, they painted his paw prints on pumpkins and told visitors the story of the shepherd on the roof. In winter, when carolers passed, they paused at Emily's porch and sang an extra verse, voices low and reverent, because Rook lay curled by the fire inside, no longer cold, no longer lost. The story had become theirs, woven into the identity of the community, a lesson handed down not in books but in the living presence of a dog who had refused to forget. And perhaps that was the greatest gift Rook had given. He reminded them all of truths they had let slip away in the busyness of life. Adults forget easily, caught up in work, in worry, in the weight of years. They forget that loyalty is not measured in convenience, that love is not meant to fade with distance or time. Children, though, see clearly. They see the invisible threads, the quiet truths adults overlook. Emily saw it the moment she looked into Rook's eyes, that he wasn't a stray, wasn't a problem to solve, but a soul carrying devotion heavy enough to bring him back to the roof where it all began. One evening, the sky bruised with shades of lavender and gold, Emily sat beside Rook on the porch. The wind chimes swayed gently, its song filling the silence. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a long while, they simply breathed together. She thought about the old man she had never met but felt she somehow knew, because love like that leaves echoes, and those echoes had found her. The narrator of this tale might have ended it there, but to do so would be to miss the point. This wasn't only the story of a dog rescued from a roof. It wasn't only the story of a little girl who saw what others could not. It was a reminder, for all who heard it, that loyalty does not die with loss. It lingers in rooftops and blankets, in whispered promises and gentle hands. It waits for someone with eyes innocent enough, or hearts brave enough, to notice. And so, when Emily tucked the blanket around Rook one last time that night, her small voice barely audible as she whispered, "Good night, my good boy," it was more than a child's ritual. It was the closing of a circle, the healing of a wound carried too long, the passing on of a lesson adults too often forget. That love, once given, never truly leaves. That loyalty, once pledged, does not break. And that sometimes, it takes a child to remind us that even grief can be transformed into something beautiful, if only we are willing to see. And so, dear friends, this was not just the story of a little girl and a dog on a rooftop. It was the story of love that refused to die, of loyalty that stood tall even when the world thought it had ended, and of healing that came from the most unexpected bond. Think for a moment. How many of us have loved someone so deeply that their memory still lives in the corners of our homes, in a favorite chair, a folded blanket, a quiet song on the radio? Rook's vigil on that roof was not madness. It was devotion, devotion that time could not erase. And Emily, in her innocent heart, saw what many of us adults often forget, that loyalty is not something to explain away. It is something to cherish, to honor, and to carry forward. When Emily tucked that blanket around him each night, she was doing more than giving him comfort. She was giving him back his place in the world, reminding all of us that love never truly fades. It simply finds a new home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in loyalty that never breaks. And remember, sometimes the smallest voices and the gentlest hands carry the greatest truths. Because in the end, love always finds its way back.